quick note to new healthHackers viewers and listeners before we begin. Anything you hear or see on healthHackers episodes should not be considered personal or medical advice. You know the score, always talk to your health provider about your concerns. Welcome to healthHackers episode 62, my first special guest interview since I had my baby, and I'm thrilled to be able to introduce Meenal Lele, author of the soon-to-be released book, The Baby and The Biome, How the Tiny World Inside Your Child Holds the Secret to Their Health. Meenal is a mother of two, a medical researcher, and founder, CEO of Lil Mixins, a company that says its mission is to make early introduction easy so we can put an end to food allergies. We're going to talk about the book in a moment, but first, Meenal, I want to chat to you about Lil Mixins and the early allergen introduction process. For those of you watching and listening who don't already know, I'm currently reviewing my experience with the Lil Mixins Daily Mix product, which is a box of mini packets of allergenic foods in an infant-safe powder form to feed to babies who are at least 4 months old, with the goal of helping train their immune systems to tolerate these allergens and therefore hopefully prevent an allergy from developing. And some of you may know I have an allergy to certain nuts, and I've been feeding these sachets to my baby girl in the hope it will help prevent her from developing a food allergy like mine. There'll be a link to my Lil Mixins review in the summary text that goes with this video. But Meenal, the advice on your Lil Mixins website is that I keep feeding these powders to my baby girl mixed with her solids until she is 1. Why 1? What is special about the age of 1?
Really, actually, most food allergies, the reason we say 1, most food allergies tend to develop between the ages of 6 months and 10 months old. So when doctors say start, after 4 months old, you're giving a little bias on the early side and a little bias on the later side. In truth, you really actually want to keep eating the food well after 1, but hopefully by that point, the child can eat food, right? We don't really want them eating artificial, not artificial, but why change the form factor? Because if by age 1, the child should be able to eat more nut butters and eat whole eggs and things like that. I know, of course, some of the nuts you still don't want to do, obviously, whole peanuts and whole walnuts and things like that. But, they can eat a lot of the other form factors. And so kind of using special products is less necessary.
So I know you founded Lil Mixins after your firstborn son, Leo, developed 10 food allergies, and you describe the early allergen introduction process, which is what we call this, as training wheels for your baby's stomach. Tell us a bit about that, and how can you be sure that it does work to prevent a baby from developing food allergies?
Well, so I have one slight correction there is my son, when he was young, he developed 8 food allergies. The 10 actually comes from, unfortunately, when we tried oral immunotherapy to treat his allergies. And oral immunotherapy, it works for some people, and in some people it makes their immune system so angry that in his case it actually ended up making him develop 2 new food allergies. So we can talk about that whole disaster at a different time. But I'm sorry, I actually even forgot your question because I was thinking about how we got to actually 10.
Well, I know that you described the early allergen introduction process as training wheels for your baby's stomach. So tell us a bit about what you mean by that, and how can you be sure that it does work to prevent a baby from developing food allergies?
Honestly, the only way you ever know prevention works, it's kind of a counterfactual. Like, you can't really prove the negative, you can't prove that it worked. But what you can see is that you can continue eating the food and you're not reacting to it, right? So a thing that everyone needs to understand, I think, that, or maybe this is helpful for me to think about, is anytime we eat anything, our bodies have a bias towards worrying that this food could be dangerous, right? Because your body has to assume anytime anything goes into your stomach that it could have bad bacteria, it could have something wrong, right? So it's always in alert mode. And so what you're doing by feeding the body these foods in a safe form at this age where the baby's just starting to eat the food is you're actually providing evidence, kind of to the body that this is a safe food. And it starts to build up certain kinds of immune cells, which we call tolerizing cells. So for all of us, we have sort of a reactive part of our immune system, right? That tells our body to go into attack mode. And then we also have a tolerizing part of our immune system that tells our body to like keep it cool. And whenever we have a cold, your body has to do that balance, any kind of virus, anything, right? Because what your body has to do is say, okay, I want to fight off the bacteria, but I don't want to raise my own body temperature so much that I'm going to hurt me, right? So what happens is that you always have this balance. And so by, the training wheels are really to kind of give evidence and data in some sense to this tolerizing immune system. And then it learns to not, basically to not call the nuts or the eggs a threat. And that's sort of how it works. And there's very specific immune cells that are trained in this and everything, but I don't think that detail is necessarily relevant.
The next part of that, I guess, I'm wondering about is if you could tell me a bit more around the studies that looked into this and what makes you so sure that feeding these allergens early on can prevent a baby from developing food allergies later.
Well, whenever we want to ask a question like this, right, will X work to do Y? The best way to do a study like that is you take two groups of people that are very similar to each other. And in one group of people, you do what's called the intervention. And the other group of people, you do a control, you do nothing. And so that's what they did when they wanted to ask the question, will feeding peanuts early prevent peanut allergy? They took 800 babies, or they took several hundred babies and they fed them peanuts early, and they took matched control, so very similar babies, but the other half of the babies just continued avoidance. And what they found over time was an 80% reduction in the rate of peanut allergy in the babies who were being fed peanut. And then you see, and this kind of study was repeated over and over. So another thing you look for when you're looking at clinical studies is how was the same finding repeated, right? And so that first study was done in the UK, and then there was another study done, actually a second in the UK, then one in Canada. It's been repeated in Australia. And then the same thing happened with egg. And so again, you use these two groups of babies, you do, feed half eggs and half not. And so what I will point out about that though is, they found an 80% reduction overall. And there's two big points I want you to know about this. Number one is that if babies kept up with the protocol, meaning if they were really good, and I guess it's not the baby's fault, so it's the mom or dad's fault, right? The parents. If the parents were really good about making sure the baby ate enough peanut every single week, there was a 97% reduction in the risk of peanut allergy. And if they did like some amount of exposure, it was more like 60. And so if you average across all those kids, 80%, right? So the first point I want to make is it's the sticking to the repeated exposure every single week is really important. The second thing that's important about that is even with 97%, that's not 100, right? So you're going to have some children who, despite doing this, will still develop the allergy. And their immune system and again, we can talk about all of that, which is kind of where the book goes, is their immune system is in a place where it's just so trigger happy and they end up developing the peanut allergy anyway. But 97% is really, really good, or even 80% risk reduction is really huge. And I know you can speak to this, right? Like you have allergies yourself, and would you take an 80% chance that you could not? I'm sure you would, right?
Oh yeah, and one of the reasons I'm doing this early allergen introduction process with my daughter is because I don't want her to have to grow up with the food allergy that I've had and the hassle that brings.
And I want to say how amazed and like impressed I am actually. I think for so many families where an older child has a food allergy, it's just so scary. And I know, I mean, you go through it personally, but as a parent watching your child anaphylax, like that fear is so strong. And I just want to say that I was really impressed when you told me when you first reached out and said you were thinking about this, because I would be terrified if I were you, and I know you've had some fears with this, but it's really impressive that you found a way to kind of go with it. So I'm very, I want to say proud, because it's not my accomplishment. I'm impressed.
Well, thank you. And there's a lot I have to say about how it's been going. Because, I have lived in a nut-free household for my own safety. So bringing your box of Lil Mixins protein sachets you've got a variety of tree nuts in there. I felt uncomfortable just having them in the house. And now the idea that I'm going to be feeding them to my daughter every single week, that was daunting. But I don't want to talk about me because I want to interview
Fair
you.
enough.
I'm doing a video about my experience.
I just wanted to make sure I told you that because I know it's hard. And so I wanted to give you
Thank you.
kudos for that.
One of my questions is, what's the reason you haven't created a powder that you could mix with a bottle of milk? Because for me, as someone with an allergy to tree nuts, certain tree nuts, I find the process quite messy because I open the sachet, I mix it. Actually, my husband has to do the ones that I'm allergic to.
Sure.
But if I could mix it into a bottle, and I know that one of the other companies that offers early allergen introduction food products, they do a bottle mix. But I wondered why Lil Mixins doesn't.
So that's a good question. So actually, there's another company that does a bottle mix, and one of their bottle mix is only for their egg peanut milk product. And then once you add in all the nuts, they no longer recommend you mix it into milk. Um, the other company, there's another company that mixes a whole bunch of allergens, actually 16 allergens, and they actually, I think they changed their product eventually to be allowed to be mixed into milk. The real limiting factor is that it's actually food, right? So the more you process it, right? The more you can potentially put it into a bottle. So I will say that Lil Mixins, you can take the packets and mix them into breast milk or formula in a bottle. What you will get is some amount of settling because it is a real protein, right? So it won't perfectly suspend or dissolve, I should say, into the milk. And the other reason we really don't want people to mix it into the bottle is because if you think about a bottle of milk, like a 4-ounce bottle of milk, there's not very much protein in that. And what happens when you eat a really heavy protein meal is you eat less. But we don't want children eating less of their formula or breast milk because that's where 100% of their nutrients are coming from. And you will, over time, start to affect how much milk they're drinking. But that's a bad outcome, actually, right? So we didn't really want that. And we wanted parents, and the AAP says to mix this into food because they too do not want you to touch how much milk the baby is drinking. So that was the big first reason. But the other limiting factor is if you look at the total protein content of some of the other products, it's the one that you can continue to mix into milk is under 1 gram of protein. But the only thing that's ever been studied is what happens when a baby eats 2 grams of protein per sitting. So, these are constraints, right? And I think it kind of comes back to early allergen introduction was really meant as a part of complementary feeding. It's really meant to be part of the baby's diet, like their food side of their diet, but not you're really just supposed to leave breastfeeding or formula alone. It's kind of sacred in that way, right? We really, really want baby to eat and get their hydration and everything else, right? We just really don't want to affect how that goes. So that's really the reason is we tell people we're nervous that would, if the baby drinks even 2 or 3 ounces less in a day, but now they're getting less fluids, they're getting less nutrients.
Got it. Your Lil Mixins 7-day offering that I'm reviewing, you've got 7 of the top allergens. You haven't included 3 of the biggies, dairy, shellfish, and wheat. How come?
So dairy, because babies, so 80% of children by age 6 months are intervening or introducing some amount of formula, so they're actually already getting dairy exposure. So then we'd be making you pay extra for something you're already feeding your baby. So what's the sense in that? And so that's the reason we don't do milk. Wheat, we found, is also relatively simple, or it's in a lot of baby cereals and other foods babies are eating. It's the same thing, right? We're trying not to duplicate things that parents are already paying for and already buying. So that's the big one. Shellfish is an interesting one where it's complicated because shellfish, when you really think about it, it's actually like saying tree nut. But shellfish is actually a whole number of allergies, right? You'd actually have to eat the shrimp and the salmon and the cod and the whitefish, all the different fishes and stuff. And there's just sort of a bit of a diminishing return there. Like they're rarer and rarer. So we went with the ones that were kind of the most probabilistic. The last thing I'll say about that is there was a really good study that Karina Venter did out of, I believe she's the lead author on this, that showed that just by virtue of diversifying the baby's diet, it protects against more and more allergies. So there's a big clinical study going on in the United States right now, a randomized control trial, and even in that study, they're not looking at shellfish. And so I just think there's a huge challenge for parents. Like, if you want to do 2 grams of protein in a day, you run out of days in the week, and you have to do it every week. So then, the baby only eats so many times, and a lot of people are going to daycare. So what are you supposed to do, right? You kind of have to make these not perfect. Um, no solution is really perfect, in that sense.
And on the frequency of exposure, so the box says use 1 packet daily. The website says 2 to 3 times a week. What is the minimum frequency to achieve maximum benefit in your view?
So according to the clinical studies, and the study was called the EAT study, done out of the UK, and they found that 2 grams of every protein a week was kind of the floor of what you wanted to do. And so you want to get every packet in. So when a baby does only one protein, because I think that's the challenge, is that some people only want to do peanut, right? And then you actually want them to eat a little bit more of it because that's the only allergen exposure they're getting. Whereas when you do the box every day, you're still eating an allergen, right? So again, kind of going back to that diet diversity thing, they do have this sort of like cross behavior that just by pushing your body to think about soy, it becomes a little bit more tolerant of, walnut. You know what I mean? So but if you're only doing peanut, then that's the only allergen that you're eating. You need to do a little bit more of it. And that's kind of where the clinical studies have ended up. So the LEAP study looked only at peanut, the EAT study did everything.
So with the box, I've got 7 packets to use in a week. So where the website says you can just use it 2 to 3 times a week, is that saying I can use any of my 7 packets?
No. So it's talking about if you just use the peanut, like if you're only using the peanut, you're not using the box. So that's sort of if you're only using peanut, and it does get a little confusing. I agree with you, but the data is a little bit confusing because when there's been different studies. When the peanut study, right, looked at only peanut and they didn't think about any other allergen, and they did 2 times a week, right? And the egg study that was only egg 2 times a week. But then the one study that looked at what happens if we try and eat 7, 8, 10 different kinds of foods, they could only do it once a day, or sorry, once a week, right? One per day. And so that's really where these protocols come from. That's the best data we have, is exactly what worked in a big clinical study.
And what was the protective effect of that study where they ate a different one every day?
If they ate 2 grams of the protein in a week, so by eating 1 packet a day, and doing it every week, then you got the protective effect. Same sort of overall. Across the different allergens, I believe it was like 60% reduction in food allergy, and you get differential effect. The big challenge in the EAT study is they weren't giving people products, so the adherence was really, really bad. And so they found good data. They found good results when people adhered to it. But if you ask someone to, make even the egg, because you're supposed to boil it first and then feed it to the baby, and like they do that every week, and people just quit. It was really good, but it was hard to get people to keep up with it.
So the minimum frequency to achieve maximum benefit is I've got to do a sachet a day. Just keep going.
Sachet a day. Yep.
Until she's 1, and then after 1, I've got to try and incorporate real foods.
Real foods.
Every single day?
No, we don't know. Honestly, we don't know, because like the studies can only tell you what the study studied, right? And so we just know that continuing frequency, the hope is that by not having the allergy, she'll just make this part of her diet, that she'll be eating pestos, and she'll be eating, like I said, nut butters, or like a banana bread with walnuts in it, or things like that. Like she'll just be eating it, and then it'll be fine. It's not, I think you really want to be, I can't think of a better word than militant. You want to be rigorous. That's the word I was looking for. Rigorous, really, in that 6 to 10 month time frame.
Okay, let's talk about your new book now.
Okay.
The Baby and The Biome. So in it, you tell the story of your firstborn son Leo's experiences with asthma, multiple food allergies you mentioned, eczema, and you combine it with research and your suggestions around the importance of protecting the health of our children's microbiomes. Can you give us the overview of how a baby's risk of developing allergies, asthma, eczema, and even IBS can be linked to this ecosystem within us that we call the microbiome?
Yeah, totally. Okay, so the first thing we need to talk or agree on is asthma, eczema, food allergies. These are all called allergic diseases, right? And in fact, IBS is now thought to be really an allergy too. So allergic diseases are all actually, in some ways, it's all the same disease. And it's not exactly true, but if you think about it, like it's not perfectly correct, but it's really, they are really, really overlapping, right? You develop one, you develop others. And it's like the same fundamental system kind of exhibiting in different body systems. So sometimes it's hurting your gut, sometimes it's hurting your skin, sometimes it's hurting your lungs, that kind of thing, right? So it helps when you think of them like, oh, they're all actually kind of the same disease, right? And then so what's the role of the microbiome? Well, the microbiome, it covers every bit of us. And the big piece that you need to understand that it covers is what's called your barriers. Okay, so your skin, that one's easy for everyone to imagine. Your skin is a barrier to the outside world. But I think one that actually really like screws with people is that your gut is actually a barrier to the outside world. The entire tube of your GI system is actually outside of you, right? If you really think about it, it's, once you cross the GI system. So we have microbes lining every bit of our barrier, our skin, our gut, our lungs. And they are part of that barrier, right? So you're in your house. So imagine thinking about both the shingles or the siding or anything else on your house and the walls. They're both part of the protection. So if I rip off the siding or shingles off your house or stucco or whatever it is on the outside, and I replace it with foam, you're going to get leaks in your house, right? And then if you started getting mold inside your walls, you wouldn't be confused by that. You'd say, well, yeah, it's because somebody screwed with my barrier, my wall. And that's basically what's happening to our barriers, is that by damaging and messing with our microbiome, we've actually made ourselves, our own immune system, our barriers weaker. And our barriers are really the first and biggest part of our immune system. So that's really how this kind of whole cascade happens. But I think that's a really critical part of where this all goes.
And in the book, you talk about what you see as the major players in microbiome dysfunction. You've got antibiotics, baby care, diet, and environment. What are some of the biggest mistakes you think we've been making in those areas?
I think the one that's by far the best documented, right, is just this like massive overuse of antibiotics. We really didn't, we really just for decades thought there was no downside. And you saw it in the neosporins and the antibacterial soaps and the cleaning products and the Purells that were constantly scrubbing all over everything. And we just thought, great, we're just getting rid of these microbes, but we were also killing off all the good microbes. And I know that one has been by far the best documented. But I don't think so many parents really think about all the ways in which antibiotics get into your life. And like I was saying, it's in meat, it's in so many of our cleaning products and other things. But in the United States in particular, the we have a massive overuse of antibiotics for children's illnesses. And that's one of the biggest culprits during this very formative stage of a child's life. We're so quick to prescribe antibiotics for things that are actually viral. And that one change, that one change will cut out 75% of antibiotic use. And that was a finding I think that we talk about in the book is they made in Sweden just by being very conscious of when they were using antibiotics, 75% reduction in their use, right? So that means 3 out of 4 times we use antibiotics in our country. It's like for no good reason. And in fact, bad for us.
There's a part of the book where it's when you're talking about genetics, how some of the risk for ending up with a food allergy does lie in a child's genes, but you say, the quote is, the real risk of developing food allergies rests in the food children eat, the medicines they take, the pathogens and environmental factors they face, and more. Do you expect to get pushback from the medical community for making that statement? And if yes, what would your response be?
I guess it depends on how someone interprets that statement, right? Because I'm not saying genetics are 0%. I'm saying that the higher order bit is everything else. And I think that's actually pretty well accepted. I'm not an allergist or an immunologist, right? And everything I'm saying in this book is actually just a translation of published literature. I think that, so I don't believe that there's actually will be a lot of pushback to that. Of course, we'll see. right? And there's always Twitter, so there's pushback to anything on Twitter. Like I could be like, oh, I love eggs, and people push back to that. So, um, no, I mean, but to be serious, I think that that's actually pretty well accepted. And if you just think about it, it makes fundamental sense. You cannot have a disease go from 0 to 100 in one generation and call that genetic, right? I'm not, again, not saying no part of it is genetic. I'm saying that most of that effect has to be coming from something else because people's genes didn't change that much in a single generation.
Tell us about some of the common baby care practices that you argue in the book can cause more harm than good for infant immune systems.
Yeah, and I was curious actually as you read the book. One of the things I talk about right in there a fair amount is that at the my sister and I had babies at about the same time, but she was living in London at the time, and the practices in the UK are so different. And her baby nurse and everything else were telling her to do totally different things than I was being told to do. And so I was curious, kind of what your thoughts were on that, kind of being from both cultures as as well. Then um, but the biggest thing that we do too much of in the United States is we overbathe our children. And when they're very young and their skin is very fragile, you're basically just stripping that skin constantly of all of its protective oils, of its good healthy bacteria, and the stuff that grows back fastest after you've kind of bleached a surface is always the bad stuff. It's never the good stuff, right? And so we actually like promote growth of like yeasts and other things, that are not helpful on our microbiome by overbathing. And I think that's one of the worst, right? And the other bad one really is we use really, I don't want to say toxic, that's not quite the right word, but unnecessarily harsh chemicals, specifically around the diaper area. And a lot of our microbiome, right, rests in our lower gut and, kind of the colon. And so that you're really screwing with your GI system when you accidentally basically push chemicals up through their GI tract by over cleaning with harsh chemicals the diaper area.
You talk about nurturing your baby's biome during pregnancy too in the book. And I wondered if you were pregnant now for the first time, what steps would you take to help protect your child from developing an allergy in the future?
Yeah, I would say that the data here isn't great, right? But what we can say is, if the mom's having issues, that's all not never a good sign. Um, and but I do think in general, the one thing that's kind of shows up all the time is the chemical exposure. So since learning all this stuff, like even our whole household has gone way like lower chemicals in terms of the products we use, the paints, everything. And I think that's a huge step that people can take. Like there's just so much stuff that we do without thinking, and there's just no need for it. Like it's not like we're cleaner for having more harsher chemicals, on our sheets and things. So why? Um, and yeah, so that I think that's a big shift, and that's a big shift. It's a great pregnancy gift. You find out someone's pregnant, and you're like, here, make sure you're using soap instead of detergent.
Yeah, there are so many suggestions you make in the book. It's interesting because there's one part where you say, quote, the habits parents put in place and the choices they make during their child's first 6 months can either foster strong barriers and a healthy immune system or set off a chain reaction of allergic responses that takes years to control. And I mean, you're going through that, the years of controlling it with your firstborn. If a parent reads that and they already have a child with allergies, they might think, oh wow, so is this all my fault? And if they thought that, what would you want them to know?
I mean, I hope the takeaway from the book, I think that's always a risk. People will feel they're being accused, right? But how could it be your fault if you didn't even know, right? And you're just trying to do right by your kid. I mean, I think that's what all of us are doing, is trying to do right by our kids. No one's overbathing their kid for like their own well-being, right? They're doing it because they think that's right for their kid or whatever. And so, I mean, what I mean by that chain reaction is, very unfortunately, is when a kid develops eczema, by stripping their skin barrier, they scratch it, and that actually causes food allergy. And then when you cause food allergy, or you allow, like, you increase the odds of food allergy, you can increase the odds of asthma, right? So that's how this, like, it snowballs. And it's horrible once you get on this, like, yeah, you're flying down the worst mountain ever, and there's like, you feel like there's no way to stop it. Um, and so I think the point of that was really, if you're at a place where you can make choices before, great. Knowledge is power. And even if you're at a place where it's already happened, what we found in our household is that by still making those same choices, we were able to pull back from the brink. We were able to reduce the number of flares, reduce a lot of the symptoms he's having, and actually, to a large extent, heal a lot of the stuff. So I think that, it's always the same stuff, that same behaviors that both prevent disease and treat it. Whether that's, the same not drinking right before bed will prevent insomnia and help treat it, right? Or whatever. It's like, it's always kind of the same good behaviors that are good for you either side.
And there's a real need for, an understanding of information and spreading awareness. I know that the point you made there about the skin barrier and how that plays into the development of food allergies. My allergist was talking to me about that when I was pregnant. I got in touch with her and I wanted to talk about ways of potentially preventing my baby from having allergies. And to me, some of the things that you also mentioned in the book, it was important to me to keep my baby's vernix on when she was born, and only bathe her once a week, starting at a later date. And I feel like these areas of research aren't necessarily very well known about. No. And I don't feel that early allergen introduction is widely known about either. Do you see that landscape starting to change now? And I imagine that's part of your goal with the book.
Yeah, actually, I do see it starting to change. I do think there's a lot more work we can do. And really, that was the genesis of the book, right? It was the true story is I was talking to my friend Betsy on the phone and I was complaining. I was like, why doesn't anyone know this? Why doesn't anyone know about this? And she's like, well, then why don't you do something about it? Why don't you fix it? Like, sit down and start writing, And here we are, right? So I do think that you have to start having the conversation, because hopefully it starts somewhere, and hopefully a lot of these things are easy. I don't hopefully none of it's like controversial, right? In the sense of like, we're not asking people to make giant shifts in their lives. Like, you have to move states or something. Like, hopefully, leaving the vernix on for a week and a half or 2 weeks is not a big ask of people.
Before I let you go, I really want to touch on probiotics. Okay. There's an interesting part of the book where you talk about this and the problem with taking like a general mix of strains, because there are certain strains that have some scientific backing and they could be most helpful. I know when I was pregnant with my baby, there were specific probiotic strains that were on my radar because they had potential for beneficial effects in utero and after birth, with research behind them. Tell us about your problem with people taking just general mixes of strains.
Yeah. So interestingly, just today or yesterday, the United States Preventative Service Task Force released a big position or paper basically saying like vitamins are useless, right? And they often do terrible things, but I feel like that's a lot like probiotics. If you're just taking vitamin, right, that's probably not useful. But if you have a specific condition for which a specific vitamin or supplement could be useful, then it makes sense. But if you're just taking a random daily vitamin, and no matter what your condition is, of course it's not going to help, and it's going to waste money, right? So that study was both useful, or that paper was both useful and also a bit annoying, because I feel like a lot of people took away the conclusion, like, definitely never take a vitamin, right? But obviously, like, prenatal vitamins are good for that specific time frame and that specific use. So probiotics are exactly the same, right? Which is, if there's you can prove that certain bacteria strains help for certain conditions, either prevention or treatment, great. And you have that, use it. But if you're just going to take a probiotic, no matter what's wrong with you, whether your skin's itchy or your hair isn't shiny or whatever, then yeah, you're not going to get any benefit. You're just going to end up wasting money. And just like with the vitamins, you might end up doing harm if you're taking a whole lot of bacteria you don't need, So probiotics and vitamins are really similar in that way. Like, they can be useful, but you have to think about what's in it, what is the goal, what is it that you're trying to treat or prevent, and has it been proven, and are you getting enough of it in there? All that stuff.
And just briefly, what were the specific probiotics that you mentioned in the book, the strains that are most heavily linked to helping with eczema or prevention of allergies?
So there was one particular one, Lactobacillus rhamnosus and B. infantis. Those have actually decent data on them. So Lactobacillus rhamnosus when taken in the specific protocol, when taken in the last trimester of pregnancy and through breastfeeding, has been shown across 10 randomized studies to cut the risk of eczema by about 50%, right? But if they did a study, if the baby just took it for, ages 3 months old to 6 months old, then you get no benefit, right? So it's very specific. And for that particular use case, right? And then there's some other B. infantis and a lot of the lactobacillus strains that have been proven. Then my last caveat on that is, to date, most of the probiotics we have on the market are just things that we could easily make and easily grow. So there are a lot of companies trying to find new medicines, if you will, by finding bacteria, find exactly what they're useful for. And I think that this, we could see a lot of drugs become probiotics in the future, potentially, but it's going to take that work.
Meenal, it has been wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much. I recommend that everybody has a look at this book, whether they intend to be a parent or not. Where can people find you on social media and follow your work?
So most of the work is all published through our Lil Mixins. It's like LILMIXINS on Facebook, on Instagram, on all the things, and LinkedIn, whatever. And so that's the best way to find us.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for watching and joining us this time. Bye-bye.